entrance. Chunghyo explains that although they did not have the courage to return to the abyss, the 4 fortress masters and 10 faction leaders had being part of an expedition at the time was no match for those bastards. There is a huge difference in strength, as they are on a completely different level. That's why fruits were stolen from the people of chaos, and those bastards still use the fruits they stole to revive each time they die, and they've been doing it for 900 years. It was as if they had another place built for them, a place called Resurrection Palace. The monarchs and 5 great families will take turns resurrecting when they die, from the start who will live. Jaehwan now knows why everyone is so indifferent. They know that, for the real life they desire, fruit is something they will never have. And after the expedition, Mulark, the expedition's captain, was never seen again, apparently saying something that no one knows before disappearing. Suddenly, Jaehwan, the extermination squad, the captain rushes in, saying they are in big trouble, adding that a dead man has appeared in the fortress 10 times the size of what Janaya possessed. Under the full moon, Jaehwan and Jaehwan ran towards the fortress, where Jaehwan noticed the energy emanating from the fortress, as he assumed that the fortress's owner was actually in a state of serious spiritual corruption. The mental pressure was 10 times what he felt from Janaya. Deep within the inner fortress, more precisely, underneath the fortress. That was when Jaehwan remembered when Chiver did not ask for compensation but only asked for one favor, which was to save the fortress master. Jaehwan then asks Jaehwan if the fort master is going through a deadly time. He says he is and explains that the fort master suddenly went crazy tonight. He also added that normally it only happens once a week, but strangely it happened today. Jaehwan also told Jaehwan that the fortress owner was a good person, and above all, he was a living legend. Because he was one of the few who continued expedition of the abyss with the divine doctor. As the two landed with the old man, there was suddenly a shaking from inside the fortress. The death aura is spreading further and stronger from deep below the fortress. Not only that, there are also Disruption Tower captains and Despair Tower captains. One is short and uses a hammer as its main weapon, and one who is quite tall and uses a spear. They greeted Jaehwan and Chaos' new home, when Jaehwan asked them to step aside. But they refused to do so, saying that wood is a problem, plus they have their orders. They intend to go against heaven's wishes, while they wear a symbol, stating that the only paradise they have is forbidden heaven. Immediately, they rushed forward and jumped on Jaehwan and Jaehwan. As they stomped on the ground, Jaehwan pushed Jaehwan aside to prevent him from getting hurt. For now, Jaehwan can hold his ground against the 2 captains who attacked him. That made him think, because he did not expect the Cam Tien clan there are people in the fortress. He expressed how the outer fortress captain had underestimated him, saying that they should not think that they still the same as before. He told them to turn back, and if they did, he said the fortress master would forgive them. The captain asked him desperately, which fort the subject was whether Jaehwan was talking about something bound underground or not. It turns out the fortress master can't even control his own power and he can even distinguish between good and evil. The captain says in despair that it is not the paradise they serve. And he asked to destroy the devil. Captain Jaehwan wondered if he would still serve that thing despite seeing the current situation. However, Jaehwan believes that the fortress master will return. The captain said in despair that that was the reason why their conversation failed, when the disruptive captain swung his hammer and tried to hit Jaehwan in the head. That created a large hole in the ground of the fortress as Jaehwan was slammed into the ground. The duo said that if Jaehwan had been a little smarter, they wouldn't have had to fight like that. Even so, both of them are only stage 4 converts and there's no way they could do that. Beats a stage 5 converter like Jaehwan. Their growth was strange, as if they were dead, and Jaehwan shouted at Jaehwan telling him to run. But when he shouted, Chunghyo was thrown in his face. Jaehwan threw the old man as he said that. It was revenge for pushing him earlier. The 2 captains asked if Jaehwan was someone who could perform dead slash and they started talking to each other. They made fun of Jaehwan for being so small, thinking he was weak and all. However, immediately, Jaehwan appeared behind the captain causing trouble. He didn't even have time to unsheath himself. His sword and lunged for a punch. That single punch blew away the hammer user, smashing him into the wall. Realizing that Jaehwan is quite strong, the desperate captain began to take a defensive stance. Now, Jaehwan mocks them back, saying that there are so many loopholes that they could call it a defense. Jaehwan dealt a light blow to the desperate captain, however, he still stood up and even continued walking to counterattack, but Jaehwan dodged. The desperate captain flew into a rage as he attacked Jaehwan. In that case, Jaehwan may also sense a stronger energy source than at that time and try to turn around it. looking at the captain desperately saying that someone like Jaehwan would not be able to save him, the fortress master, let alone approaching him. There, Jaehwan realized that strength comes from fear. That made him feel how ironic that they would try to betray others with just that level of ability. However, Jaehwan said that he couldn't save the fortress master because it was the old man's job. However, killing 2 turncoat captains would be a different story. He jumped up towards the captain of the Tower of Despair, ready to slap the captain's butt. Meanwhile, in the dungeon of the fortress, the aura emanating from the deadly fortress master had not stopped. Chiver with other senior officials of the fortress gathered, watching anxiously as they couldn't believe that after just one day of being used, the fortress master had gone mad. However, the divine doctor was there in the morning and they confirmed that the energy had calmed down. Chiver leaves and wonders why there is a fort the owner suddenly got mad. If only he had another month, they would have been able to ask for Jaehwan's help after a few trials, but it happened unexpectedly. Right after is too suspicious. Chiver then suspected that someone there knew who Jaehwan was. He knows for sure that there were traitors among them. Chiver reminded himself that before that happened, the fortress master wanted to check the tower outside to see the people who can control the corruption of souls even though he is not of the Emerald Beetle clan. Chiver tries to convince him not to go alone and send a captain instead, but the owner of the fortress insisted on going himself. Afterwards, the fortress master boasted that he was the one who survived that battlefield, the exploration incident. Although he returned infected with corrupt souls, and was immediately unable to help anymore. For now, Chiver can only suspect Maihan did it, but he didn't proper evidence to back it up. Afterwards, Maihan told the people around to destroy the fort's owner because the corruption was getting worse. Chiver tried to hold them back and told them to wait for the divine physician, but Maihan says that cannot win against corruption, and he offers to attack the fortress master together and perform Dead Seal. Chiver still tries to stop them, yet the captain of the Dark Team arrived with the Soul Stone in his hand. And now Chiver knows where the original Dark Team captain belongs. The admin inside is a traitor. And inside the box was the stone that Jaehwan had before. Maihan says the future of the threatened Gorgon there, and asked how Chiver could hide the stone for himself. He asked again if Chiver intended for the fortress master to transform into a supersized dead man. The divine physician wasn't there. What Maihan said actually made quite a bit of sense, but once the death seal was in place, there was no way to bring back the fortress master. Even though there are no Emerald Beetle clans around, Maihan still brings along his somewhat sketchy and overly misguided-looking men, whom he claims can perform the technique. Once they complete the seal, the fortress owner's soul will be contained in a soul stone and can become the Gorgon's next owner. Depending on who owns it, it can be dangerous if it falls on the wrong person. As soon as the men touched the magic stone, Chiver realized that it was all just planned by the external administrator, Hyman. Everything happened half a year ago, from the time the fortress owner's soul was corrupted until he became crazy. So he shouted to the guard to arrest Hyman immediately, but to his surprise, no one obeyed his orders. Chiver fell to his knees, losing all strength, realizing that they were all in on it. And he couldn't do anything anymore. In his heart he apologized to the owner of the fortress. Plus it was because they couldn't protect the Gorgon. He cried his eyes out as the men performed the mark of death on the bound, crazed fortress master. Suddenly, the ceiling opened with a force. Although it was quite strong into the dungeon, no one seemed to be injured, only a few barely avoided the rubble. Even so, everyone was still wondering about what had just happened, but in that case, a ray of hope appeared before Chiver's eyes. As the Shadow Team captain and Hyman convulsed their tongues, thinking it was a bad time. Jaehwan appeared with the soul sword in his hand and Jaehwan, who seemed fine after the fight with the 2 captains. They stood indifferently because nearly all the people gathered there were traitors. Maihan asked Jaehwan who dared to go there with that behavior. Jaehwan told the administrator outside to stop there and then threw them both down. Hit the captain in the face. Jaehwan says that his treacherous actions have been exposed to the world, as they have revealed all. The captain of the disruptive tower tries to apologize but Hyman blows him away mercilessly. That surprised Jaehwan, because Hyman claimed that the 2 captains had decided to commit suicide upon being captured. Exposed, then asked how Jaehwan could blame him for not being able to stop them from committing a crime. So Jaehwan ordered the guards to arrest the manager outside. Instead of obeying the order, the other captain pointed his sword against Jaehwan. They apologized and asked Jaehwan to stand down, and told him not to go against their wishes. The Celestial clan was forbidden, and they needed him to stay until the fortress master's seal was complete. Jaehwan, who had been silent until now, finally opened his mouth. He said that in exchange for saving the fortress master, Gorgon will protect Jaehwan. Plus Chiver made a false promise to him. Because Gorgon couldn't promise to protect him, Jaehwan suggested changing the content of the promise. Jaehwan said that he would save the fortress master and kill all the traitors present. In return, Jaehwan wanted the old man. He wanted to organize the Abyss expedition again. Now Jaehwan asked for it and surprised all the high-ranking people around. Hyman expressed that it was nonsense and added that he had heard about this story, about there being someone who could kill Janaya, a dead man, with just one blow. He thought it was a lie, but now he knows Jaehwan really did it. And he decided to use all his strength against Jaehwan, ordering his men to rush in. At that moment, Jaehwan clenched his sword, preparing to greet all the attackers. Members of the Forbidden Celestial clan began entering the dungeon, including those already in the dungeon. In that case, Jaehwan constantly used his trust. Like a sewing machine, he trusted each member of the Forbidden Celestial clan. Even the Dark Captain doesn't have enough ability to fight back, pushed, and could only swear to himself. However, they continuously attacked Jaehwan and the members of the Forbidden Celestial clan seemingly endlessly. So Jaehwan had had enough. He sighed at the number of their prophets and used normal force thrust towards the crowd. It reduced their numbers, and Jaehwan also showed his normal thrust to Hyman, the first elder of the Forbidden Celestial clan. He tried to block it for a moment, just to realizing that it was impossible. He finally dodged the energy from the attack, and that caused a big hole in the dungeon. There, Hyman realized that if he had not stopped blocking, he certainly would not have survived. That shocked both Jaehwan and Chiver about Jaehwan's strength. While people from the Celestial clan were forbidden to talk to each other, to continue with the seal, or use Black Cloud now to turn everyone in Gorgon into dead men. Jaehwan realized that, so he called Hyman and said he was Gorgon the manager outside the fortress and also the first elder of the Forbidden Heavenly clan. He didn't know what they were trying to do or why they wanted to corrupt the souls, but the admin knowing that, and Jaehwan likes people like them, that's really something he's grateful for. Because there are people like them, he can destroy that world and still feel secure. Jaehwan began to focus his energy, focusing on his sword, and Hyman, realizing that, spoke. All members under his command will take down Jaehwan, with whatever they need to do. Everyone started running in again as Hyman ran away from Jaehwan. With everything they had, they tried to attack Jaehwan, as the only target, Jaehwan himself pointing his sword towards the sky. He smiled as he felt relieved that he could destroy it everything without thinking that innocent people will be affected. And he charged it, a mighty thrust upward, towering in the sky, destroy members of the Forbidden Celestial clan who dare to stand in his way. Above the sky, the energy from the thrust became fireworks that spread everywhere. Fortress, as Hyman could only witness the king leaving him unable to do anything. While Chiver and Jaehwan saw that something was being born, an overwhelming feeling arose, hope that the people of chaos need. The scattered energy fell on the Forbidden Celestial clan people, just like Jaehwan had intended to do from the beginning. That reminded Chiver of the Fortress Master, which explained that there was only one great hope. That doesn't falter in the face of anything. Because Chiver couldn't believe that he felt the overflowing hope that the Fortress Master talked about. From Jaehwan, the man was talking about the destruction of chaos. When the dust settled, Hyman's body split in two, saying how weird that bastard Jaehwan is. However, he was too late because the Fortress Master was no longer able to help. But Jaehwan doesn't seem to care about that at all, stabbed the traitor in the face and destroy him to get nutrients for the illusion tree. Then Jaehwan ran up, and now with complete respect he said that the old man would not wake up no matter how hard Jaehwan tried. No need to think too much about it. Jaehwan grabbed the old man and slammed it against the wall, surprising the extermination captain. However, when the god doctor woke up, the corruption of the fortress owner's soul had exceeded the point of no return and the corruption level reached 99.9%. The fortress master's soul power is finally broken and his death process finally begins. Red lights all around, notifying everyone in the Gorgon that a giant soul is about to undergo the death process. However, after the system estimates the danger level of the final goal is impossible, and the system's verdict says a supergiant deadman will appear. Gorgon's automatic warning system was activated and people began to scatter, fleeing the fortress. From afar, James could only wonder what had happened in the castle, when the aura of Dai forcefully extruded out. Meanwhile, Chunghyo is getting ready and asks Jaehwan to help him clear the way because his thrust is too sharp to save anyone. In that case, the divine doctor draws his world to perform the death slash. With his newly acquired sword, the old man swung his sword, drawing back memories the fortress master, to engrave memorable memories into dead, as he explains to Jaehwan that is what dead slash is about. He added that if they are filled with memories, at least they can avoid the worst. But, a sound rang out, and the world that the old man drew changed. There he saw a creature extruding the aura was crimson, had its own world, and seemed hostile towards the old man. It turned to Chunghyo, when the old man realized what was in front of him. He is not the fortress master. His world started to crumble, when he said that he definitely felt like something was wrong there and told Jaehwan that it was in front of him was not the fortress master, instead it was something completely different. Then, the fortress master's body began to break the chains that bound him, with crimson eyes, who was said to be the master of the fortress. Chunghyo was drenched in sweat as his master's body quickly awakened into a completely different being. Jaehwan knew that it was something more powerful than any creature he had faced in chaos. When he falls to the ground, it will shock Jaehwan and Chunghyo. As he expressed it, it was surprising, and he never thought he could come down to this world with his master's body. Finally, the Gorgon is invincible. The fortress master also became a dead man when he saw a familiar face, Chunghyo. The thing told him that Chunghyo had not fully awakened but was still in the chaos after the year 900. Many years ago, where he found the fruit. At this, the old man looked on in horror as he realized that the thing possessing the master's body was the owner of the dead man. Palace is located in the midst of chaos. He is also the only being who can open the door to the abyss, the only king, the catastrophe. Jaehwan questioned, but all he could see was deep darkness. The creature before him was neither human nor dead. It's neither alive nor dead, but it also doesn't look like an object. Jaehwan could only wonder what the hell was happening before his eyes. Disaster summons his magic, attacking the two people trying to save the fortress master. With just a snap of his fingers, he erased the old man's world and summoned his own. Then, Catastrophe looked at Jaehwan and said Jaehwan was an interesting person, as he possesses a heart despite being fully awakened. Although Jaehwan was still unfazed, Chunghyo had lost all strength in his legs. The power of the only king, dead descendant, he definitely used it for the fortress master, and that was just his copy. However, even then, his strength remained the same, stunned in front of the old man. Suddenly, Jaehwan spoke to Chunghyo, saying that he had failed, adding that he was thinking of killing that thing. Catastrophe smiled and asked if Jaehwan really just said he would kill the one and only king of the abyss. He wriggled his neck to show how the person in front of him was so interesting. However, Chunghyo thinks Jaehwan must be joking, saying that even Molark can't do anything against the one and only king. Even though it may be a clone, that power is still overwhelming. That's when Jaehwan told the old man not to be afraid, as he claims that he can defeat the only king. It impressed Chunghyo by how calm Jaehwan was in the face of the impossible, while Catastrophe laughed maniacally. He told Jaehwan to do his best as the king summoned the sword from his mouth. He grabbed his dark broadsword and said that Jaehwan was one. The foolish awakener possesses a human heart. It was the Void Sword, a terrifying weapon that turned half of the expedition team dead in an instant, shocking Chunghyo because he couldn't believes he is seeing that sword again. The disaster rushed towards Jaehwan as he tried to dodge it, while Chunghyo was hit by strong winds. The king spoke up that he saw eyes that resembled Jaehwan, eyes that said Jaehwan wanted to go into the abyss. That surprised the old man. He didn't know anything happened in a fortress, while he also did not know any information about the child in front of him. Chunghyo knew the boy in front of him was very mysterious, but he never thought about Jaehwan wants to go to the abyss. The king shouted. He seemed really excited and said that it was wonderful that there was someone who wanted to achieve that. The end of this world, even to this day. But that wasn't enough. Jaehwan wasn't even close to the mare he knew as Molark. The king's movements became faster. Jaehwan has yet to successfully attack the king. The king moved much faster than Jaehwan's light thrusts. Catastrophe grabbed Jaehwan and swung his sword with the intention of cleaving him in half. However, with the king's quick speed, Jaehwan miraculously avoided the attack. At the same time, he focused his energy into his sword and performed a normal stab on the king. Now, Jaehwan had lost an arm as he thought about what he needed to do next, but, in the blink of an eye, disaster was in Jaehwan's face and attacked him again. Luckily Jaehwan saw and dodged again. The next thing was the void sword swung wide towards Jaehwan, as he dodged the attack, but he felt that his sword-pierced hand had turned into a dead cell. Then, he focused his energy on the tip of his sword and attacked in the usual way. However, as if the original king wasn't there, he attacked back with a vertical attack towards the small human in front of him. That blew Jaehwan several meters away, as the king said corruption is essentially a disease of the times. With just a scratch from the sword of nothingness, for centuries, even millennia will pass. And souls that cannot endure time will age, deteriorate and become dead. Jaehwan was not confused. He cut off the damaged part from his hand. It makes Catastrophe show how impressive Jaehwan's brave spirit is. To think that he had cut off a part of his old soul like that. However, that was all he had, the king declared. As he unleashed the void swords one after another, a total of 10 swords were in his possession, but Jaehwan did not flinch. The 10 normal faith clashed with the king's 10 void swords. After Catastrophe took a closer look, he learned that Jaehwan's sword was just a toy created by Mare from Mare's tower. He said again how impressive Jaehwan was, because already able to hold on with just a mere toy as the void sword landed on Jaehwan's shoulders and legs. There he immediately cut off damaged cells from his body. The king didn't stop, he attacked again, when Jaehwan received the blow. Attack with his unsheathed sword. He thinks that the only king, Catastrophe, is really strong. He could not measure the strength of his opponent. He couldn't see his weakness even through the awakening skill. Without that skill, his understanding would not work, and all he knew was that creature I have lived in front of you for countless years. However, if Jaehwan continues to fight like this, his soul will not be able to survive. No matter how many times you try, he couldn't concentrate because the matter he was seeing was messing with his vision. Jaehwan's unique world is one that he remembers as people who have disappeared and recreate them with your imagination, and each awakened person has his or her own unique world. The world was created by a keyword they received upon awakening. It's like their wishes or feelings. A powerful awakening could pull more creatures into their own unique world. In that case, he attacks threw away the king's sword and he tested it. He summoned his own world from his imagination. A pair of strange eyes appeared in the sky. A moon with a flock of crows pecking at the moon eye. Pouring blood into the ground to feed the world with a lava-like substance. It's hell. Jaehwan is living in hell. His world is made of hatred and rage. A world that destroys all worlds. Now the king was able to see Jaehwan's world and he exclaimed how interesting it was. The king's voice became even more excited as Jaehwan jumped right into the king's face and stabbed him. Into his mouth, pressing him to the ground. Now, Jaehwan can finally see. After him summoning his world, the last particle disappeared. After being unable to move, Catastrophe summoned death. Tentacles came out of his body, rotting Jaehwan, and said that Jaehwan kept rushing at the king without knowing how to end the fight. He slammed Jaehwan into the ground, causing it to break into pieces like a titan's steps. He held the small human flat on the ground as he said, that person who does not give up his hatred. And it's been a long time since he found an interesting existence like Jaehwan. He summoned his void sword again and attacked Jaehwan, ended him right there, saying it was fun but it was a shame it had to end. Suddenly a bolt of lightning struck Jaehwan, his eyes lit up and suddenly a ray of light appeared and hit the king straight in the face. The attack cut the king in half, while Jaehwan said even though the king's fun was over, even though he's just getting started. And he unsheathed his divine sword, for it glowed blue. The king did not accept it. As his body disintegrated, he changed form again and said that Jaehwan would never be able to touch the king's body. He grew massively, into a monster with 4 legs, on his head also appeared a crown made from void sword. And his attack became the void sword itself. Jaehwan avoids him to the left, because strike fell mercilessly just because he was a small human being. Disaster was a monster, stronger than anything Jaehwan had ever fought. On top of that, the speed of that thing was even faster as he attacked Jaehwan again, pushing him against the wall. That hit Jaehwan so hard, it made him throw blood gushed out, as it entered him again. But this time, Jaehwan dodged the attack and appeared behind Catastrophe and rushed forward. However, the king managed to turn around and deflect the thrust as he spoke. Says he witnessed the creatures trying to build the world for millennia. They all climbed to the top of these 3 things to appease their own curiosity. He asked, was Jaehwan trying to find some answers from this world of his, and what exactly was Jaehwan's question? But then the king saw Jaehwan's world. Interestingly, his voice became even more excited. Their swords touched each other. Jaehwan felt strange as he moved his sword. He had never felt this way. When their swords touched, thousands of words were exchanged. The king said that Jaehwan did not give up his hatred even after he realized the truth and emptiness of life. The king was very surprised. He had never seen the creatures that had destroyed the world for over millions of years. They all climbed this tree with their questions. Catastrophe said as he deflected the thrust, as he asked Jaehwan's question to be answered with such a world on my back. Jaehwan didn't answer, but the king seemed to understand. That the world itself is Jaehwan's question. Their swords touched again. A world that has collapsed. The thrust has reached its maximum power, as Catastrophe demonstrates just how arrogant Jaehwan's world is. A mere human questioned the value of the almighty land. Meaning Jaehwan questioned whether the almighty land was worthy enough to exist. However, Jaehwan did not answer but dodged the king's sword. This situation was definitely one that Jaehwan had experienced somewhere before. When he remembered the fight against Beast Rain, what descended upon the fortress master was the replica of the one and only true king. That means his current self can defeat it. The disaster shook as the whole world screamed, and his powerful push was unleashed. The king still stood up and said that Jaehwan's arrogance knew no bounds. He then asked if Jaehwan knew that he would never be able to kill the king. He added that now he was bored and started doing his big attack. With his great size and massive jaws, he attacked the small human that dared to stand before him. Another flash appeared in Jaehwan's eyes, and now he saw it and thought he knew it, that the clone was connected to the king's main body. So all he needs is to cut that connection. And he jumped into the air, performing a technique called crack, that could sever the connection between the clone and the main body. Jaehwan's world was shaken violently, as the king now knew that Jaehwan was the one who lived to the end. Now he will wait for Jaehwan at the entrance leading to the abyss. And he was gone. The fortress owner fell. The ground was like a rag doll and Jaehwan sighed. It's finally over. He wasn't sure if he could succeed. The king is as powerful an enemy as he can be. Will lose if he tries to fight it immediately. That made him realize that his pushing force was no longer enough. He needs new skills to climb down into the abyss.